Hi, this is Mary Baca with Remotely Unique, coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I am interviewing Jeff Marr today, who is from Colorado. He is an ex-police officer, having served in the military as a police officer and therefore being a veteran. And also he was a police officer in Colorado. The title of today's show is Falling from Grace, A Road to Recovery. And Jeff is going to share his story about the things that led up to him losing his career as a police officer. I am so grateful to Jeff for coming on the show, and we will be with you momentarily.
Okay. But one of the things, one of the areas that I think is really important and powerful about your message and your story is there just is not compassion for law enforcement officers, like, at all. And you hear all this, defund the police and, restructure and all this stuff. And I get it. I understand. But you don't hear about the mental health aspect of anything, what law enforcement officers go through. And in the whole restructuring, there's another word I'm not thinking of, not defund. What's the other? There's something else. It's like a popular thing they're saying, but you don't hear them mention anything about providing mental health services for law enforcement officers. And I just get so riled about that, because it's like, I'm not saying that some of the things some of these officers have done is okay at all. And nobody hates a bad cop like another cop, for sure. But I think you have a powerful story with many hidden messages about that whole area and more, and I'm sure you've thought about what you want to get across today and what's important for you to say. So you can even just start by introducing yourself, and whatever you want to share is all going to be helpful.
Alrighty, yeah. So I'm Jeff Marr. I was a dispatcher for a couple of years before I turned 21, and then police officer for 8 years after that. It's something I always wanted to do from the time I was in third grade. So that was always my goal and always my dream. So I just made it happen as quick as possible. I already had the police department, smaller police department here in Colorado that I worked for at first, where I was a dispatcher. I had it lined up to where they put me through the academy. I was still working full time as a dispatcher, but they paid for it. And then, I graduated 3 weeks after I turned 21 and already had my job as a cop there. So it was definitely always been a passion of mine. Obviously, still something that I'm passionate about, helping out. As we've talked before, I've been on both sides, unfortunately. I allowed, I always tell people about one call that kind of sent my brain spiraling. But really, the more I think about it or have thought about it, it's really the cumulative effect, of all the years. And from, I was in training. I think I was in month 3 of training when I first saw somebody die, like
Wow.
their soul leave their body, and I was 21 years old, and I have 7 kids. My oldest is 21, and I can't even imagine, her seeing something like that. And then just no tools, no resources on how to process that, and it's kind of, it's traumatic for anybody to watch somebody die. But just in the whole realm of law enforcement, first responders, I think you're kind of just, it goes without saying that you're just supposed to sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't bother you,
Right.
I remember that night I had gotten home, I was a swing shift. And that was back in 2003 when we had the huge blizzard here in Colorado. That was like the second night of that blizzard. So I just remember I didn't know how to process or do anything. I just took a hot shower and I stood in there and cried. That's what I did. And then I figured by the time I was done with that, then, go back to work the next day. And finish writing reports and then go to the next things. But anyway, for some reason that experience keeps coming through my mind again and again as I'm talking to other people about it. And you know, that obviously something that happened almost 20 years ago, still I can remember it, you know, like it just happened 5 minutes ago. So obviously it was traumatic. Obviously it stuck with me. And so, you know, for a long time when I'm telling people my story, I'm telling them about, you know, New Year's Eve, I had a little 18-month-old baby that ended up having to do mouth to mouth because we couldn't get a mask to seal. And that is the call that, you know, he didn't make it. And that's the call that really, it sent me spiraling to the point that, you know, I started drinking a lot, started missing work, stuff like that, from drinking and not being able to. You know, looking back, I remember showing up to court a couple times and people had to have smelled it, you know. And unfortunately,
How far into your career was that call with the baby?
that was just under 8 years. So yeah, that happened New Year's Eve into 2010, and then by July, I was getting arrested for domestic violence. So I got into a argument with my girlfriend at the time, ended up pushing her a couple times, and that was that. So but yeah, so to me, like, you know, like I said, I always share that story, which is really what sent me spiraling. But looking back, it's all the years of dealing with different things and seeing different things, or not, I shouldn't say dealing with it, seeing different things, experiencing things, but not dealing with it, not processing it, and not, you know, not doing it in a healthy way. And there's really no, it's better now for sure, resources. But and we had resources then too. And I was told, you know, from the chief down, everybody said, you know, it's super traumatic. Everybody there obviously knew me. I had 6 kids at that time, and my youngest was the same age as that baby. And so, you know, everybody said we have counseling and you can go, you know, no questions asked. But again, you know, it's kind of like a macho thing, and you're not going to go to counseling. You just got to deal with it. And more so than that, even it's that it's really hard for, you know, first responders in general to just open up to somebody that hasn't seen it, hasn't done it, you know. And that was kind of my thing, you know, like, what's this person going to tell me that, you know, they weren't there, you know. And so yeah, it's kind of obviously a lot happened in that 8 years of me being a cop. But you know, that's where I'm at now with trying to get back involved and share my story, any training I can do. But you know, really the biggest thing that I'm pushing is just mental preparedness, and then, you know, what to do with it in your brain.
Well, and the hard part is in the culture, first responder culture, drinking is acceptable and encouraged. So that way of coping is, you know, a lot of the first responders I see laugh about it, you know, because it's so ingrained and so acceptable within their culture. So then you have that too.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, you know, looking back, I had total Superman complex, and you know, we had a hockey team, you know, with some guys from the police department, and a few of us after every hockey game would go to the local bar and shut it down, and I would drive 45 minutes home. And you know, there's no way I should have been driving.
Yeah.
But you just have this mentality that, you know, you're bulletproof. And
Mhm.
that's really the other part of my message a lot too to police officers is, you know, like I said, I've been on both sides. I spent unfortunately 8 years as a police officer, and then the following 8 years getting in trouble, getting arrested many times, spending jail time, things like that.
Do you think that was like part of your way of dealing or not dealing, right? Like, do you think getting in trouble legally was a fallout from losing your career?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. And I would still, you know, was drinking heavily, and, you know, for a lack of better terms, I was pouting, you know. It is something, honestly, I still grieve losing that career, and I still, you know, I'll be a cop till the day I die inside. But really that's what I was doing. I was pouting, you know, I was feeling sorry for myself. And, you know, there's really not anything that you can ever do in life that's the same as being a police officer. There's other things obviously that I was meant to do, and that's part of what, you know, why I'm reaching back out and trying to help, you know. And maybe that was the design all along, maybe that's what I was supposed to be doing. But you know, I'll have 2 or 3 dreams a week still that I'm a cop, and in my dreams I know I'm not allowed to be a cop ever again. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah,
A
it's
lot
tough.
of grief that goes with that. Well, it's something that I really admire about law enforcement is it's a big family. And so to lose, there's so many different things when you lose a career as a law enforcement officer, there's so much that you lose with that, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a huge aspect too, and what I emphasize. And I guess I start out sometimes by telling some cops, you forget how hard it was to get the job. You forget what you went through, how many hours you put in applying and testing, and your psych exams and your polygraphs and oral boards and all this stuff. And even before that, the academy, and how much it takes to go through that and actually make it happen. And after a couple of years of doing it, I'd say 80 to 90% of police officers have forgotten what it took to get there. And, more than anything, really take for granted the position that they're in, because it is something that you can never replace it, and it's, sometimes I've talked to a couple of police officers who are thinking that, maybe it's not the career for them anymore. Maybe, if they're getting burnt out, my message is take some time off, quit right now, quit before you get fired, basically, because then you can always go back, but so I mean,
Sorry.
you're good. Just, in kind of the processing all of that, it gets taken for granted. I took it for granted for sure. And like I said, had a Superman complex, and that was my identity. I was a police officer. I talked to a good friend
Which
of
is
mine.
which is almost necessary, right?
It is, but it isn't. I think, it's, you're told from the academy to to separate the two. You go home and you gotta, once you take the uniform off, that's it. You gotta have family time, you gotta do this and that, and then vice versa. Once you get into work, you gotta forget about what's going on. That's just not,
Well,
it's not
that's in hindsight, though. But how at the time did you think?
well, I mean, for me at the time, I was always a cop. I was always turned on, and always, as the years went on, I quit carrying my gun everywhere I went, which, um, you know, good and bad, I guess, but there was never a need to use it. But it was just so ingrained in me. It's what I did, and I lost, time with my family, holidays, birthdays, missed a ton of stuff, and seeing my kids grow up, putting in so much work and dedication to a job. And then really, to get back to what you were asking with, it being such a family, I literally went from being a police officer to getting arrested and not being a cop in a matter of hours. And, the department I worked at the time, there's 45 officers there, and I think there's 4 of them that still talk to me afterwards. And, it's just, the victim of that was a dispatcher at the police station too, which made it even worse, really. But I went from being a cop and having my dream to the very next day, it's gone, and
Oh, yeah.
to never have it back.
Literally overnight.
Right. And really, the cause of it was my complex of thinking that, I can do whatever I want, and I'm Superman, I'm a cop, and not dealing with all the underlying trauma, other than drinking, which, that's every time I've gotten in trouble, there's been alcohol involved. So it's obviously not the way to do it, but that's the way a lot of first responders choose to. And I really feel like after talking to some people I worked with over the years, they separated themselves quickly, because I think a lot of people understood how thin that line is, that, they probably crossed it a few times and just not gotten in trouble for it, but it is, you're high stress, and you take it home whether you want to or not. And there's some officers that can do it, but I guess, my biggest thing is there's no real specific training on here's how to not take it home, so
Right.
that's what I work with as far as like mental performance. And the certification that I got with that is actually he's a guy that works with professional athletes. And he's you're working with, major league pitchers and going through the whole mental process of, all right, so you had a bad pitch. Now you need to process that, get rid of that memory, and focus on the next best thing and what you have to do next. And that's super quick, obviously, for a pitcher, but it just it's every aspect of life. If you're holding on to something that happened, your brain's still processing that. You're not able to move on to the next thing, or at least not do it, as best as you can. So that's kind of
Well, the hard part too is trauma affects the brain, and you guys have to go from one call to another, to another, to another. There is no,
right.
There is no break. I mean,
Sure.
Even if you're not dealing with trauma back to back, you're dealing with difficult people, or, lots of noise and sound, and like overstimulation of the senses, like nonstop.
Right. Yeah. I still remember that call I had that the baby passed away. And as soon as I cleared that scene, I got dispatched to a cold hit and run accident. There was no processing it. And again, it was one of those things of just, all right, we're fine. And I knew I wasn't okay, but what was I going to do? And I actually had my partner that was there. I'm on the way to this other call, and she sent me a message on the computer and just said, "You okay?" ? And at first, I started typing back, "Yeah, I'm fine," or whatever. But I remember I erased all that, and I just replied, "No." And she said, "Yeah, me neither." And so we ended up meeting up later and, kind of talking through some things, and, told each other we were there for each other, but really that was, there was no more real processing after that. I didn't, it was New Year's Eve and I didn't go home that night. I chose to go out and drink and stay away from my family. And really that night, for me, I didn't feel like I could face any of my kids after I just let a baby die. And, over the years, the more I process it and the more I'm healing from it, it wasn't me. I did everything I could for sure. And so I didn't let the baby die, and I wouldn't have, kept it.
But in the beginning, did you carry that?
Oh,
in the beginning?
For
yeah.
9 years. So
yeah. Because first responders, you guys are really brutal on yourselves, and on each other too. So like, with getting help, what I've heard from the first responders I've counseled is like, okay, if you have a baby die, there's a lot more compassion and understanding if you're not coping with it well. But if it's anything other than that, kind of like the expectation is, suck it up, buttercup, pick up and keep going. And if you don't, like, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. Yep. And it's the biggest part of my message and how to process these things, and making it, normalizing the need to process and work through it. It is, when kids are involved, everybody's a little bit more sensitive, but there's car accidents that happen, and you see bodies that are in positions and have done things that you never would have thought, and it's traumatic, and it's the same as.
Well, and all the smells, right? There's that, all the noises, death notifications, and hearing the screams of the family members. There's so many different pieces to it.
Yeah, and that's where, I say normalize it, and I say normalize the need to heal, but really beyond that, it's humanize yourself again. Mm-hmm. Give yourself permission to feel things, because like I said, I went from being a cop to not overnight, but I still carried everything, like should basically be getting, getting a pension just for what you have to go through and deal with,
right.
whether it's a few years or an entire career, because for me, that stuff will stay with me forever. And that's how it is with every first responder. And, not to say that, I would do it again in a heartbeat if I could, for sure. But just, I really believe that there's ways to heal and be able to move forward, but I think, to me, it starts with giving yourself permission to feel, and to process those things. And you could be the most hardened police officer out there, but it's going to affect you at some point in time.
Oh, for sure.
That's what I tell people. It's not a matter of if, it's when. For me, it was that one call that set it off. But like I said, looking back, it was years worth of just shoving it down.
Mhm. Well, and how were you with your coping mechanisms when you walked into the profession? So like, because what I've seen too a lot of times, not just even with first responders, with people, like we're not born knowing how to cope.
Right.
And sometimes people don't have effective coping mechanisms, and then they, go into law enforcement, for example, and if you don't have coping mechanisms at the get-go, that just is really a disadvantage,
Yeah.
So how was that for you?
I mean, I had none. I was 20 years old when I started the academy. I had 2 kids at that point. I had my first daughter when I was 17, and so I grew up quick. I was married in high school. I got married my junior year of high school, and
Wow.
had a couple kids as I'm going through the academy and all that. And it was just it was never brought up really. It was just one of those things, like I said, at that time anyway, we're told, hey, leave it, you got to leave work at work, and leave home life at home, and that was it. But if nobody tells you how to do that, it's
Yeah.
so I have a construction company too, and a couple years back I had hired just some day labor workers off Craigslist because I had a 5-foot deep hole that needed to be dug, and I didn't want to do it, so I'm gonna pay somebody else to do it. And um, had a couple kids show up, I mean, early 20s, and after they had been out digging for about 45 minutes, they had gotten down about 10 inches into the ground. And here in Colorado, the soil, it can be rough for sure. And there's clay and, but my business partner at the time, I walked out there and actually he had the shovel and he was just going to town on it and super aggravated. And I was like, dude, what's going on? He's like, they're not doing anything. They're not getting this. And so I just asked them, I was like, do you guys know how to dig a hole? And they both looked at me and said, no. And for my business partner and I, we grew up in Colorado and doing chores, chopping wood and this, and like digging a hole is just something that you do, right? But so I just talked to them for a minute. Well, they grew up in California and lived, on the ocean, on the beach, just a different lifestyle for sure. They never dug a hole in their life. And so I, grabbed the shovel, grabbed the pick and taught them how to dig. And, a couple hours later, the hole was done. But I just tell that story to say, sometimes we assume people should know things, and without any training, something as simple as digging a hole, you got to learn how to dig a hole before you can dig a hole. So learning how to cope and what you're supposed to do and how to process things, that's really where I'm coming from and trying to help, and obviously it'd be great to get a program in academies, before you ever see the first thing. So that way, how to process it. And I think there's, I don't know, call it a stigma or what people see on TV, before they even get to the academy. I talk to some people who are getting ready to start an academy or they're going to be cops and they already have this mentality of, oh yeah, I'm going to see some things, but it's fine. Like we just got to deal with it. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. But so there's just this, I think it's just an overall attitude. Obviously I was a police officer, so that's what I really understand. But, firefighters and paramedics, talking about like one-on-one situations, dealing with people passing away and families and all that. I mean, they say a whole lot more of that for sure. So yeah, I think it's a little bit more accepted in those communities, and they're a bigger community for sure, firefighters, and they all go back to the same station. So they do have the opportunity to talk to one another. And, I don't personally know, but I can imagine it's just a little bit better, than a police officer who, most cops throughout the country don't have a partner with them. They're riding solo. And so you get back in your car and then you go off and do the next thing and you're left to you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that is really different from the firefighters I've talked to. But if you have a crew where that's going to be okay, I think like only recently, maybe like in the past 5 years even, is it becoming okay? And it's like molasses, the change,
Oh, yeah.
that it's becoming okay to have feelings about that call that they all just left, But it is better in that, yeah, they have a firehouse to go back to and, be around each other for the next 48. And Whereas you guys, you're just out there alone with your own thoughts, which isn't always good, right?
For sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and when you don't have a coping mechanism in place, you just shove it down,
Mhm.
but
So
obviously,
what brought you said that you were pouting for however long. What brought you to the end of that? To where, you started to see things differently?
well, it's been on my heart for a really long time to help cops out, and I do have a unique story and an advantage really when it comes to talking to other police officers, because I've been there, done that, seen it, smelled it, heard it, so I can relate. And so when I'm trying to help somebody through something, they know that I know, how they're feeling intimately. I know. So,
Mhm.
but my drinking was getting more and more out of control, after I lost my career, obviously, and then just during that whole time of me pouting, really, it was just distracting myself by drinking or having other things going on. I do have severe depression, and so that didn't help either when I chose to drink and go on a bender. And so last year, in August, 2020, I ended up having to go to the hospital, and just from detoxing, I just finally made a decision that I just don't want to feel like this anymore. And so that kicked off me being sober for 4 months, and really I started sharing my story on Facebook and helping a lot of people out, and that's how we met, was through that kind of stuff. So I think there had to be a switch in my brain from okay, I can't ever do this again, but what can I do? And me wanting to help people has never left. Like I said, I have a construction company, but I hate it. I hate doing construction. It's not it's not fulfilling at all for me. Um, but it
It
pays
pays
bills.
the bills, yeah.
Right. So that's what I do. Um, but really, I think, in all those years of me having these ideas and wanting to help, and I did a couple things here and there, but I wasn't ready mentally to take on anybody else, because, really, if you're going to tell somebody, so say like for life coaching, if I have a client that I'm going to coach, I got to have my stuff together because they're going to be counting on me.
Right.
So now I have somebody else depending on me. So I had to get to the point that I was able to control, what I was doing and stop self-destructing in order to help somebody else.
Yeah, and I mean, even with that, like, we're all human beings, and so part of and you on Facebook, I don't know, it was a couple of weeks ago, you were going through a hard time, and I think that's also part of setting an example for people, is for people to realize, hey, we all fall,
Yeah,
it happens. And so can you talk about that a little bit, about what was going on with you?
for sure. So like I said, I have depression. It's rare that I go more than a couple days without suicidal thoughts. And it's not a touchy subject for me anymore, because there's nothing that I can lose. But it's there's a difference between kind of being sad and kind of having some, I wish I wasn't here. But when I say suicidal thoughts, and I'm hyperactive brain and overthink a lot of things and tons of thoughts constantly, but when I say suicidal thought, it's the thought, how to do it, when to do it, what it's going to look like, who it's going to impact, and all that stuff. And really throughout the years, it's a matter of just, to me, it's allowing myself to feel the feelings and then let it go. Know that it's not coming from me, it's not what I want, but instead of giving it energy, really, I just process through it and then let it go. And in the past, what I would do is use that as kind of motivation to feel worse. And it's it's a slippery slope, but it was almost like justifying then, okay, well, I feel bad, so I'm gonna go drink some more, or I'm gonna do this or that, or
An excuse to do that.
right. And for anybody that has severe depression, I mean, like I'll wake up one morning and just feel like a ton of bricks is on me, and it's just like an emotional, and it's a deep sadness that can't really be explained. And so for somebody like me who has trouble with alcohol as well, you know, if I drink alcohol and then I feel bad, well, now I understand in my mind why I feel bad. So, um,
What do you think? Have you always had depression even before you became a cop?
yeah, for sure. I mean, as I go back through my timeline, you know, my past, I was as far back as I can remember, I was 13 years old and told my parents, you know, that I was having these thoughts, and the advice I was given from them was to pray more, and that was that. So, and just comments that they would make, you know, here and there, you know, somebody like depression's not real and blah blah blah, and you know, people just aren't tough, and you know, stuff like that. So I learned how to just, again, shove it down. That was my coping mechanism, was to not talk about it. And you know, up to the point that when I was, you know, around 18, 19 years old, I was convinced that God hated me because, you know, been praying and it's not getting better. So, you know, that turned me away from a lot of, you know, going to church or my faith and any of that kind of stuff. And then I was in CIT training, which is crisis intervention training, and I was sent there by my sergeant. I didn't apply for it. You know, it's in that time, you know, hopefully it's a little better now, but at that time, that was one of those touchy feely classes, you know, and that's not cool. And I was, you know, high speed, low drag, you know, one SWAT and this and that. I always wanted to be running around with my hair on fire. So that to me was like, you know, boring, touchy feely. You know, I don't want, this is a stupid class, but I'm getting sent there, so I have to go. And it was either the second or third day, and we're going through and talking about different mental illnesses, you know, like
I
schizophrenia.
went through that training here, so I know
Yeah.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, so we got to the part of, you know, people that have severe depression, and I still remember where I was sitting and how hard that hit me. And my first thought was, oh crap, I have depression. I can't let anybody find out, otherwise I'm gonna lose my career. And so, like, looking back on that moment, I wish I would have immediately got some help, you know, which I could have done without anybody at the police department knowing. But again, it was me just thinking I can handle this by just not acknowledging it. Um, and so that was, you know, that then that started compounding too and making things worse, because, you now I know I'm depressed and I can't tell anybody. Um, and just real quick, even like you said, you took that class. That was, you know, of all the hundreds, thousands of hours of training that I've done, like that's in the top 3 classes I ever took. It actually, I talked to a few people out of suicide after that, because it wasn't, to me, it was no longer about, you know, you need to toughen up and you're being selfish. It was just about understanding another human being is going through a crisis right now. And if they're at their wits' end and reaching out, a lot of times somebody just wants somebody to be there, not fix it, not do anything. But I mean, if somebody's already past that point and made the decision, you're never going to talk to them, right? Like they're already going to do it. So, but really that training's helped me out even now. Like when I started sharing on Facebook and had a bunch of people reach out to me here and there, and, in 3 months, I, went back and looked through messages and this and that, and there was 15 different people I talked out
Wow.
of suicide. And,
Wow. Mhm.
so it's, and even that, I'm not saying that I'm doing anything special. It's just listening to somebody and not trying to fix it for them right there in the moment.
Well, and caring, right? Because like I think sometimes people just feel like nobody really gives a crap about what they're going through, or so, when I could imagine you putting yourself out there and just helping people, even just making time for them makes people feel like they're worthwhile at a point in their life when they don't feel like they're worth anything.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I have a lot of compassion and empathy for, for anybody who's feeling that way. And that's what I share about, and I don't, anytime I talk to somebody and they tell me how selfish it is for somebody to kill themselves, I say, consider yourself fortunate that you've never felt that way, because it's selfish in a way, but it's selfish because that person wants the pain to go away, and that's it.
Well, and and I'm not telling you anything you don't know when I say this is first responders it is not uncommon at all for a first responder to be suicidal. Like, I mean, that's just like breathing, and so I train the people that work for me and other people like to be really aware of that. And in fact, when we get a call for counseling from a first responder, I say that call has to be returned within a couple of hours because it takes so much for a first responder to reach out for help,
Yeah.
and in 2 hours they might change their mind and be like, yeah, I'm good. I don't need it after all. I've had that happen.
Yeah, for sure. And
Have you gone to counseling yourself?
I have done counseling.
And has that been helpful, or what's been helpful and what hasn't been?
It was at the time. It was either, probably 4 years ago now. But I actually, one night was suicidal, posted something on Facebook, and my family saw it, my sister saw it, and called Denver police, and they came by and talked to me, and I got put on a mental health hold for a few days, and which ultimately was good, so I wasn't left to myself, and to handle it the way I was going to. But yeah, the counselor that I started seeing after that was helpful, just in the approach that he took to it, which kind of mirrors like what I do with coaching. And it's more of, you have the answers and we're just going to work through it. You're allowed to feel that way. It makes sense that you would feel that way about certain things. I remember some counseling sessions I would go in and I'm beating myself up because, not sure why this is bothering me so much. And he would just say, it makes sense that it bothers you. It would bother me if that happened, so, and it wasn't
normalizing.
Right. And it wasn't about, let's go way back in your history and find out where all this started. It was like, no, it happened today. And what's making you feel like that right now? Let's figure out how to deal with this small thing right now. And then we can move on to other things, So that's, that was really helpful for me.
And you haven't tried EMDR yet?
I haven't, no. I'm still willing though. Need to get down there and do that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Or maybe I'll get up there. I haven't, I have a good friend of mine lives in Longmont. And so I used to go before COVID, I would go out there like every quarter. I'd go out there and just decompress and spend time in the mountains, But then once COVID hit, like I didn't go at all in 2020, but I will be making it out there soon. So maybe we can arrange either way because it's just so helpful. It's so helpful. Yeah.
For sure.
And then you were saying that you've been reading about the emotion code. So are you interested like in holistic stuff?
I am, for sure. And that's, excuse me, another part of, what I share with people. There's actually a buddy of mine that, we were cops together. And he told me about that book. And he was like, dude, at first, I'm like, whatever, this is all voodoo, blah, blah, blah. He's like, but nothing else has worked. So I'm just going to, what do I have to lose, basically. And so, yeah, he told me about it, and yeah, I started reading it, and I'm a believer. I just need to make it happen.
Yeah, I can do emotion code with you too.
Yeah,
so we'll have to schedule some time. Yeah,
for sure. I want to go through that too, and then, like I said, I have a way that I can connect with police officers because I was one, and again, I think there's a stigma there. A lot of people think, it's just hippie stuff, this and that. And I'm completely opposite of that anymore. I actually have right here on one of my boards a quote that says, if the medicine worked, you no longer need to take it. And so that to me is what, modern medicine's been around for whatever, 100 years, but humans have been around for a really long time. So I think we have it in us and there's a way to heal and get past things, and I even believe, that depression can be cured and there can be things that are done to no longer be depressed. And when I think about that, part of my holdup, just to be completely open about it, is I don't know if I'm ready to let that go. It's what I know. It's what I've known for as long back as I can remember. I tell other people about it. I refer to it kind of like as my whoopee. It's like little kids have that little blanket that they don't want to let go of because that's their comfort. And so to me, it's almost like, what does life look like if I don't have depression, and what does it look like if I'm not suicidal? And, you know, I also believe, you know, obviously energy, and it works both ways. So I think that there's something pretty big in the works for me, but there's and the reason I say that is because there's something that's trying to hold me back from being able to achieve that, you know? So, you know, whatever people believe, you know, if you believe in God, then obviously you believe in the devil. So the devil doesn't want me to do God's work. So he's going to keep reminding me that I need to stay in this place of just being stuck.
Mhm.
And so really, I mean, honestly, that's what's kept me there for so long. And just in the last even few months, I've just had the same message been told to me by just different people, you know, of, you know, imagine how big your reach could be if you believed in yourself, you know, and if
Yeah.
you believe
Yeah,
in
but
something.
you know, it's not easy to get there. It's like, I mean, that's very true, but it's not, you know, like you can just snap your fingers and be like, you know what, that's right, you know, and wake up tomorrow and be there.
Right.
But, you know, a lot of what you're talking about, it sounds like is shame, you know, which a lot of people really struggle with shame, and for no good reason. I mean, you can meet somebody and they can look picture perfect and sound picture perfect and everything, and they don't feel that way about themselves, you know?
Yeah.
But there's a paramedic that I have worked with for quite some time now. I've known him many years, and we started calling his depression his mistress, because it felt so much like part of him. And so at least by calling it his mistress, we've been able to kind of put that separation where it doesn't feel like it's a cloak that he's wearing, you know, I mean, it's still there. And I do think it's scary for you guys to let go of even of the horrible calls and stuff. Like, that is part of who you are.
Yeah.
And it can be even scary to, right?
For sure. I was actually talking to a friend of mine. He was a cop for a long time too. He was on SWAT for many years. I don't know if you're familiar with the school shootings in Colorado, but there was one in particular at Platte Canyon where the guy held a couple of the girls hostage and ended up ultimately shooting one of them and killing her. And, you know, he was on the shield for the entry team, you know, once they blew the door open and came through. So, you know, he watched it all happen. And, you know, so there's just a quick background on, you know, a little bit of what he was going through. But as we're talking about things, you know, just different things are coming to my head. And I was like, man, it's almost like cops think it's a badge of honor once you have that traumatic call. And, you know, you really haven't seen anything until you've seen something. You know, you're not a real cop until that happens. Nobody says that, but it is, you know, like as I'm working through things, talking to him, I'm like, man, it's almost like when it finally happened to me, I was like, all right, now I'm a cop, you know, and now
Now I'm legit.
yeah, exactly. And that's where like you don't have to carry that though, you know, in order to still be a cop and to still do amazing things, you know. And so
Yeah.
to go back to what you said about, you know, it is a process, and that's for sure. And that's what I tell people too. You know, a little plus a little plus a little plus a little equals a lot. So it's the start that stops most people. And that's true for me, you know, even with that, you know, I just need to get it done, make it happen. You know, I also train people at the gym, and that's another thing, you know, a lot of people talk about it, and it's usually Monday. Everybody's going to start on Monday. You know, I'm going to start the gym on Monday or start my diet on Monday because Monday's a good day to start. And,
Uh-huh.
you know, there's another quote I carry on my phone all the time that says one day or day one. You know, you can start anywhere you are and just start making it happen. So, and it is, you know, something that's going to take time. And this is, you know, things that happened 20 years ago, I'm still carrying with me. So obviously it's not something that's just going to happen overnight. But I do think it's important for me to go through these things and heal, because then that allows me to speak from experience, you know, and that's unfortunately, you know, cops are a pretty closed off profession and people in general. And, but I had a cop friend of mine many years ago. I was talking to her about some stuff, and she's like, "Why do you want to work with cops? You know, they're all jerks." You know, we were both cops, and I was like, for a minute there, it kind of set me back, and then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, because I can, you know, and you know, I can get in front of a room of a bunch of cops, and obviously you'll have some that still have their egos going. Well, that's fine. You can keep your ego, but once you lose your badge, your ego didn't do you a lot of good. So,
Yeah, no kidding.
and that's
Yeah.
just, like I said, I have that perspective and I can talk, and, it doesn't bother me. I'm open about it. Even like you were talking about, I posted a few weeks back on Facebook. I've had I've been a cutter when it comes to my depression and suicidal thoughts since I was a late teenager, meaning I'll use a knife and cut myself because then I'm feeling physical pain to go along with the emotional pain.
Right. Or to deflect from the emotional pain, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And that was, me sharing that to social media was kind of like, a bigger step than a lot of the
I
things.
was really proud of you that you let yourself be that vulnerable. And I know that's not easy for you. It can't be, but you're so great about keeping your focus on helping other people, That's why you're here. That's why you get out on a public forum like Facebook and are so raw and real, because you know that it's going to, if it helps one person, that's amazing, right? One person. And I'm sure you've helped hundreds, if not probably thousands of people.
Well, I hope so. And that's kind of just where, when I started sharing, that's where I was coming from, and even in that video I did about, talking about cutting, I said, I'm definitely have an ego for sure. So if somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm going to do it. And I don't let a lot of people's opinion persuade me from doing pretty much anything. So I kind of got that mindset too of, if I share this and somebody looks down on me, well, oh, okay, I don't care. It's not for them, right? It's for the person that feels alone and, doesn't want to talk about it. And so that's, my biggest message over and over is I share these things so people know they're not alone. There's one day I shared a picture, and usually I'm smiling in my pictures, and this day I was just depressed, and I just sent a message and said, hey, even because I have a lot of people that, send me messages and you seem to have it all together. I'm like, oh, it's definitely not all together. It's, every day you gotta work on being better. But I shared that just in a way, again, just to let people know, like we still go through bad days, even though everything could be trending up, you're still gonna have rough days. And I had a lot of people reach out, and it was awesome. People are reaching out and sending me messages, you need something, let me know. And it was it was heartwarming for me for sure to have the support. And I think it took a lot to share that too, because I didn't want to come across in any way like I was trying to get sympathy, or trying to have anybody feel bad for me and, reach out and get attention. Again, to me, it was just one of those things of just letting people know. And
right, but then also it's okay for people to reach out and be supportive, and like you're not wanting that attention, but it's okay for people to support you like that too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I have it is hard for me when I'm at my worst to reach out because really it goes back to that CIT training, because it's before that I had no idea how to talk to somebody who's going through a crisis, other than, well, do you have kids? What do you have to live for? And it's like a lot of times, when somebody's that far gone, they've already thought about all that stuff, and when I'm in those situations, I've already thought about that. I don't need anybody to tell me how to feel better, and like I share a lot too. And I tell people, I'll just sit with you in the dark, and in my mind, I'll sit with you and hold your hand in the dark, just so you're not alone. And then when you're ready to get up and walk to the light, like we'll go do that, and then if you want some suggestions on what to do, then I'll give them to you. But ultimately it's not fixing somebody who's in that position. It's just being there for them. And so it's hard for me to reach out because so few people know how to do that. It's almost like the norm. If somebody says they're depressed or suicidal, people are like, oh, well, just go for a walk in the sun, go get some sun, or watch a funny movie and to me, I'm like, there's literally nothing I haven't thought to do to feel better. It's just not happening right now, And so sometimes you just need to go through it, and time makes it better, Another quote that I share a lot too is, it says, hold on with a semicolon and pain ends. And that's true, and as long as we keep pushing forward, it's gonna come to an end at some point. And so for whatever
sometimes it's
reason,
good to just take a nap, like
yeah,
just
for sure.
stop that whole pattern way of thinking. But yeah, I agree with you. Like just sitting with somebody and just being with them, meeting them where they're at instead of where you want them to be, in order to think things are going to be okay.
For sure. Yeah, and that's, I shared about that a while back too, is like self-care, and I'm bad about that still, of just taking care of yourself. And I think getting back to like the police world or first responders, if that was more acceptable, to have a mental health day and not get made, be made to feel bad about it or whatever, but you call in sick if you have a cold, if your brain's not engaged, you shouldn't be working, and just being allowed to take some time to decompress and to
Yeah,
heal.
but then if you do, and I think law enforcement is worse about this than other realms of first responder stuff is, then your ability to be on duty is put into question.
Right.
And are you fit for duty, and then your gun and badge, there's a danger or a threat that could be removed, which is extremely humiliating and shaming and awful.
Right. Well, that's like I said, when I went through CIT and I self-diagnosed, but it's pretty apparent, and I was like, I can't.
We're all checking the boxes. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was it, I can't let anybody know. And so it is a slow process, but it's got to start somewhere. Somebody has to lead the charge, and I know you do a ton of that, and that's where I'm coming from. It looks like nobody climbed Mount Everest till somebody climbed Mount Everest. So just eventually getting that normalized, and there's the old school breed of cops are not, they're I wouldn't say going away, but it's starting to transition out. And I don't agree with a lot of different philosophies on how policing should be done from certain people, because at the end of the day, there is sometimes, violence needs to be met with violence. If somebody's committing a violent act, then you got to meet them with violence.
Yeah, there are those times for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not saying any of that. You don't need to be engaged, and your training doesn't need to be good. But along with all the training, like even through the academy and through all the training I did, hundreds of hours on a driving course and hundreds of hours on the firearm range and arrest control, and then going over policy and procedure, and spend so much time on that. And there's no time on mental health, and like what it looks like, what you should do. And, there should be mental health days. You should.
And the resources, because, first responders don't get paid a ton of money either.
Right.
So it's like, sometimes, okay, is it eating and putting gas in my car, or is it paying a copay? And that's another thing I think that a lot of departments need to be mindful of, like finding the money, and the government in general. So different layers of awareness of that, and saying, okay, that needs to be part of the change, because here you guys go, they send you out to battle, into the field, and you walk back with all these trauma issues. And they're like, and then something happens like what you went through, where that leads up, right? That's a slow burn cumulatively to leading up to getting in trouble and losing your career. And then you're just discarded. It's like, okay, whoops, well, now you're on your own.
Yeah.
And you go do you. And, when a lot of the trauma was because of work.
Right. And that's, talk about that too, is, a good friend of mine works for Denver PD, and we were talking about some stuff, and I was telling him, that was my identity. And he told me something I wish I would have heard when I first became a cop. And he said, being a cop is what I do, not who I am. And I think every cop needs to hear that. You need to separate it. And if you don't know how, like, let's work through that and let's figure out how you separate that. Because like you said, I was discarded, and I was, but I messed up. Like, I caused it. I have nobody to blame but myself. But that doesn't change everything that I carried still, and like I said, missing out on kids' birthdays, watching them grow up and being an angry dad a lot, and like, getting home where it should be your sanctuary and not. I listened to Eric Thomas. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a motivational speaker. He's awesome. But he talks about a lot too. He said, so many people, they go to work and they give their job, 80%, 85%. And so they come home and what's left for their family is 15%.
Yeah.
And I loved hearing that. And I, obviously thought back and was like, geez, I don't think my family even got 15% from me.
Yeah.
But as I talk to cops, or the message I put out there, like I said, be a professional in your job, do your job, train, be ready, handle things, but don't let that become who you are, because guarantee you, if something happens and you lose that job, you're still dealing with all these things, so yeah, I mean, taking a mental health day is sometimes necessary. And to me, the kind of the model that I'm putting together and want to get into departments to train on, it's not even necessarily first going to the department, it's going to human resources and saying, you guys spend $100,000 to hire a new officer, to outfit them, to put them in training, to do all these things, spend some money, budget for these kinds of things, for, mental health training, or the ability to have, like a life coach available, already have it paid out. They don't have to pay anything. And a lot of departments have, different things set up. But I know one of my old departments, Golden, they have every year now that people have to go in for a check-in.
They should do that.
Yeah.
Every department should do that.
Right. It's mandatory. And again, like each cop's going to do with it what they're going to do. But
Mhm.
at least it's starting the process of saying, it is important. Just go talk, And so rather than losing a cop that's, a veteran cop, I feel like after 5 years, you're either going to stay in it forever or you're done. And there's not a lot, after 5 years of being a cop, pretty much anywhere, that you haven't seen or gone through. So it's so much better from a financial aspect, even for the city, to hold on to that resource, and, if I added up all my training hours, I have a doctorate on being a police officer, but that doesn't transfer to any other career. But they do invest tons of money and time into somebody to train them and have them there and prepared. And if you have a cop that's good, invest, it's just a little bit more to keep their mind right, and have a mental check.
Oh yeah, and if you have a cop that is mentally stable, they're going to perform better. They're going to be more present. They're going to be less reactive.
For sure.
They're going to be more present for their families. I don't know if I had shared with you when we talked before, but I was married to a cop myself for 14 years. And and I also have friends and family in law enforcement. And so, from the personal aspect, right, they see a different part of the officer and have to live with the night terrors and the nightmares and the sleepless nights and the moodiness and the substance abuse and the right.
Yeah, I many years back, I thought of a book to write. Obviously, I'm not great in relationships quite yet, which is why I'm single right now. But yeah, even that. So I go back and think about it. I was 20 years old, going through an academy, and the male brain isn't even fully developed psychologically till mid-20s. Well, I'm 20 years old, being told you're in charge, you're the man, people need to listen to you, you have to have control. And ultimately that went back into my relationships and has gone into relationships, to where, somebody wants to take a time out or walk away. And I'm like, no, we're fixing this now. Like, we need to handle this now. There is no time to fix this later, and that's just, it was ingrained in me so much. And so in my first department, Blackhawk, we had two different types of calls for just making a contact with somebody. And one was a suspicious person, and then the other one was a non-suspicious person, which is just saying, I mean, it really doesn't make a lot of sense if you really think about it, because as a cop, everybody you talk to, you should, there should be something that there's a reason why you're talking to them, so you're kind of suspect. But anyway, just thinking of those two things, I thought way back, I need to make a book or write a book, or at least talk to cops about the non-suspicious suspect, which is your spouse, because to me, it's like, that's still how we treat them. I'm a great interrogator for sure. And that doesn't translate great to relationships, and
or to your children, right?
Right, for sure. And I hear everything that somebody says and the way they say it and the words that are used, and so then in relationships, it's been my experience anyway, it gets exhausting for the other person, and why do you take everything so literal? And well, I mean, if you say always and it doesn't always happen, then don't say always, but it's trying to find that balance too. You know, and understand, like, they're not going through, and they haven't had the training, and they're not, you know, they're not a suspect. That's your partner, you know, that's your wife or husband, and or kids, you know. And I feel like, I just know from my experience, I've treated them like they were suspects, you know, and interrogated, and, you know, get loud and boisterous, and, you know, and you're going to listen. And instead of just trying to understand them, you know, or try to hear where my girlfriend, or I've been married twice, so your ex-wife, whatever, where they were coming from, I'm sitting there listening to what they're saying so I can break it down, you know, and basically tell them that they're not right in what they're saying, because here's all the holes in your story, and here's the flaws in what you're saying, you know.
Mhm, mhm.
So I think, you know, that's a huge part of it too. And there's really no training on, you know.
No, there isn't, or what it's going to do to the family. I know, like locally here, Albuquerque Police Department, they have a lot of things in place, but that's not the typical way that it is, you know?
Right.
It's
Well,
not.
if you really look at the law enforcement field, you know, I've been arrested for domestic violence 3 times now over the last, you know, the last one was in 2017. And it was for being controlling, you know, pushing or grabbing. I was wrong every time. I got to believe it happens a lot in the law enforcement community. And even with that, you know, your your spouse, who are they going to call? First of all, you know, they're thinking nobody's going to believe me, or even beyond that, you know, if I do call, there goes this person's career, you know, there goes. And I know in a lot of domestic violence situations, you know, it does prevent the victim from reaching out, you know, thinking that whoever's providing, if that's the case, you know, if that gets taken away, then what do they do?
Mhm.
But it's almost like compounded for, you know, cops or first responders, of being like, you know, I mean, if you're a construction worker and get arrested for domestic violence, once you post bond and get out of jail, you can go back to work, you know. It's not how it is for police officers or
Right.
firefighters. So, you know, that's part of too. I'm open about what's happened to me, or what not happened to me, what I've done, and just those kinds of things, because to me, even opening up the conversation and talking about it, if there's another cop out there that hears that and is like, oh crap, I'm going down that hole, I
Mhm.
need to get some help for it, or, you know, I need to talk, or, you know, whatever it is, find somebody to talk to about it. You know, I think also in just dealing with relationships, my ex-wife, you know, we had 6 kids together. Well, she was a stay-at-home mom, and I was a cop from 21, you know, so our maturity levels and growing were drastically different. You know, she stayed at home, and that's not taken away from what she did, but she wasn't watching people die, you know, and she wasn't running around pointing guns at people and saying a bunch of stuff and all that. And so it was probably by the time I was in year 2 of being a cop, I quit telling her what happened. I quit sharing stories with her, because, you know, she didn't she didn't have the tools to process what I was telling her. And
Yeah, and there's that vicarious trauma.
yeah,
The real
and
thing.
again, as cops, you know, we're gonna shove that down, and we joke about it, right? And we make a
Mhm.
joke on the scene, or we joke about that call, and we joke about, oh, that body was messed and this and that, because that's how we're coping.
Yeah, the
But
dark
then
humor.
when you go
Mhm.
home and you joke about that to your wife or your husband, you know, people who aren't, I think cops have a certain, you know, you're wired a certain way to do that job. And you talk to somebody who's not wired that way, you know, that it does cause trauma to that person, and they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to deal with that. And so I feel like that caused a rift in our marriage too. Is like, I don't feel like I can even tell you what's going on. You know, I mean, I'm sitting there, and it's a selfish thing. It was selfish for me, thinking, you know, well, I'm the one that experienced it. You know, why are you sad about this, or why is this bothering you? And so again, that's one of those things, though. There was no training on that. It was just leave it at work, you know. And you know, I can remember, you know, when my marriage was falling apart, and I'd be driving on the way to a call, and, you know, her and I are texting back and forth arguing about something. You know, I wasn't engaged. I wasn't ready for what was ever going on. And I always took a lot of pride in being mentally prepared and going through a lot of scenarios in my head. And so I think that preparation helped me get through a lot of things where I wasn't really ready. and thankfully nothing major happened. But, you know, obviously there's a lot more eyes on everything that law enforcement's doing these days, and with the body cams, and, you know, everybody's an expert on being a cop. And, you know, I tell people all the time, I'm like, well, they're hiring, you know, if you know a better way to do it, go do it. But you don't, because, you know, but shoot, I just lost my train of thought of where I was going with that. Oh, that's right. A lot of things are coming to light, and people aren't, even like the general public is not understanding, like, that's still a person, you know.
Yes.
Who knows? They could be going through a divorce, and it could be nasty, and there's a lot of things going on in your mind. And again, it's just like being mentally prepared and taking care of yourself first. And, you know, if you are going through it and it's rough and this and that, and you need to take a day off of work, that's so much better than making a bad decision on a call and, you know, end up hurting somebody, or, you know, anymore, losing your job and getting arrested and being charged, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Colorado is, yeah, they signed a whole new law about a lot of that, which is pretty scary for police officers. But again, I think a lot
is that the qualified immunity you're talking about, or no?
Yeah. And the way they changed it here is just, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, obviously there's different calls that happen where a cop did wrong and needs to be charged with a crime, you know, but
right.
If that's sometimes mistakes happen, you know, just because that's how life works. So, but I really feel like the core of all of it is mental health, you know, and not saying that you have a mental illness for mental health to be important, but, you know, you need your
I totally agree. It's like, and I'm upset that that's being left out of the conversation altogether. Like, developing mental health resources and paying for resources and programs for officers, like, that should be at the forefront, included in everything else in change, you know, it needs to happen.
Yeah, I was, when I was talking to my buddy, you know, we were just kind of brainstorming some things. You know, that's where, like, the program that I want to put together, or have been working on to get out there to law enforcement, it's more of instead of therapy, it's coaching. You know, again, it's the mental health part, you know, mental performance, and coaching that, and not, so, you know, a coach is observing things, giving you drills to do, but you ultimately have to do it. You know, you're the player, you're getting coached up. And so, and with that, I think that there's an opportunity to add other things too, you know, like, well, it's kind of sounding like maybe you could use some EMDR, you know, maybe this could help you, or this could help you. But just getting somebody to start that conversation is where the holdup has been, I think. And so, you know, I'd outlined kind of a model of getting, and I know they have like peer support right now for cops and things like that in a lot of places. But again, if they don't have any training on how to help somebody be mentally prepared, it's not really going to help that aspect. So, yeah, kind of the model that I put up was just that, you know, basically having law enforcement or ex-law enforcement, you know, that have this training. And so everybody's kind of being told the same thing. And it's not a mental diagnosis or anything like that. It's just being mentally, just having a higher level of mental performance in everything, you know, meaning, you know, we're going to read for 20 minutes a day, you know, read a personal growth book for 20 minutes a day, you know, don't watch one episode of Netflix. And people would be amazed if they just did that for a month, how different their life would look, you know, and how different things would be. And then I feel like part of that, and then being mentally engaged, and then you do start to identify some of these things and thinking, okay, I have depression. What do I need to do to fit, you know, to handle this? Instead of thinking, I can't let anybody know. And with that too, I think, you know, being mentally engaged. And so if you're having a bad day in your personal life, being able to go to your sergeant and be like, dude, I'm not in it today. You know, I can't do this. And so, you know, with the outcry last year for defund the police, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, I always, you know, I kept saying they need to fund the police more. You know, you need to put more money towards law enforcement. So you do have more resources, so you can take those days off, so that there is more people working to where you don't feel like you have to be there for your shift. Otherwise, you're gonna leave everybody hanging and this and that.
Because look at all these departments. In any first responder, there's always vacancies.
Yeah.
I've never seen a department that is fully staffed, ever.
Yeah. I have a good friend of mine. He's a chaplain at Golden Police Department. He actually runs Rocky Mountain Chaplains, and I think he said there's 175 chaplains that he works with now across Colorado. But they have, in the last few years, been setting up these retreats. And so, a department identifies somebody that's kind of going through it, and, whether it be a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, but they'll send that person and their spouse if, they're married or whatever, but just, send them up to a cabin or something like that. I can't speak.
That's what they did. I did some work with the first responders at San Felipe Pueblo in 2019, and that's what they did with their officers. And it was hard for them because they were hard to not be, they felt guilty for not being at work.
Yeah.
They really got a lot out of that weekend, and their department, they paid for it.
That's awesome. And I think what you touched on right there is that guilty feeling, and I understand it, but that's where I'm coming from when I'm telling people, you can dedicate your life to that job, but that job will replace you if you leave. Whether you leave on good terms or you leave on terms because you messed up, and that's with any career. I saw a quote, I think it was Denzel Washington, but talking about, if you died tonight, your job would be posted tomorrow to be replaced, so don't live your life for your job. You have to, obviously you have to do your job and do a good job, but yeah, that's where I guess encouragement's the right word for it, is just encouraging people to take care of you first, because I'm living proof of it. Once you're done, you're done. I was actually, when I was fired, I was going through physical therapy because I hurt my back on duty. When that didn't continue, once I was done, and my back is still messed up to this day from it. So it is, I think it's important to have pride in what you do. You can be proud of your job, and you can be a hard worker, and you can do all these things, but at the end of the day, if you're a construction worker and you break your arm and you can't swing a hammer, you can't show up to work. So if you're a first responder and your brain's not engaged, you shouldn't be at work. You're dealing with people's lives. And so
people, the other officers that you're working alongside with, and then the public, and it's a risky situation. But I like that one department you said, and they've talked about it here, but it's not being done, where because some of the departments you'll have to go through like a physical agility test to make sure that physically you can still do the job.
Right.
And so I've heard some departments say, well, maybe there should be a mental agility, or mental, just like a mental check, like, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? And there are going to be some people that lie through it, but maybe they'll stop and touch base with themselves and think, maybe like you did when you were in CIT.
Yeah. For sure. And that's where, I talk about, relationships, and my problem in relationships, or, dealing with domestic violence and things like that, is I feel like just by me sharing that, and I can share my experience and what's happened with a ton of people. And again, like maybe somebody hears that and is like, oh crap, like I'm right on that line. I'm, obviously you're not going to go tell your sergeant or go, you're not going to tell the command staff, but just knowing, okay, I'm on that line, I need to do something about it. And to me, it's even more so than I need to do something about it. It's having like, where do I go? How do I dig a hole? So that's what, that's kind of what I've been putting together, is not just here's the warning signs. What do you do when the warning signs are there? And even if that's, from my program, whatever, coaching, if that's just reaching out and talking to somebody, for 45 minutes. I had come up with an idea, and I just need to make it happen again. But with Zoom being so prevalent these days, And, people can shut off their screen on a Zoom meeting and you can make up whatever name you want for it. And I was talking to my friend about that too, is, because going back real quick to that Platte Canyon call, he said they got back and the debrief for that was ridiculous, like they were all in a room, got asked some questions and they got sent home, and that was that. But I was telling him, I was like, man, with Zoom, you could have 200 people in a room and it could be cops from across the world, really.
Mhm.
But, I said, I'm just going to start setting up these meetings. And this was a couple months ago. So again, it's the start that stops most people. I just need to do it. And if one person shows up, so be it. But anyway, the format or how it would look is, I would start by just sharing some of my story. And then somebody in Nashville maybe is tuning in, and maybe they feel open enough, their screen can be off. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody's tracking their IP address or anything. They can share something. And then maybe somebody that's in Oregon hears something that person said and like, oh crap, I have had that thought. I have had those feelings. So, it's more than anything like normalizing it and understanding that you're not alone in what you're thinking. Like so many people, cops especially, are thinking, I just got to deal with this, like I said. And the first time I saw somebody die, I went home, took a shower and cried. And I did that with every single person I saw die. That was just my routine. And it doesn't matter to me what anybody thinks about it. I cry all the time. So if I got to cry, I cry. But that still didn't really help deal with, the actual trauma and processing it. That's just what I did, because ultimately I was sad that somebody died, and going to a scene where somebody's dead and watching somebody die are two very different things. I've literally watched people's souls leave their body.
Yeah.
Staring them
Did
in
you,
the eye.
did you really see that?
I saw it as
Yeah.
clear as I can see.
Because I believe in stuff like that. It's and I do a lot of work with first responders. I ask that of a lot of them because they usually are hesitant to talk about it. They won't just initiate that conversation because they don't want people to think they're crazy. So I'll bring it up.
Right.
And then that's a whole other piece of work that is able to happen, because that's very daunting for some people. Or just even people just being able to say, yeah, I've seen many people's soul leave their body, and not feel weird about talking about that.
Yeah. And again, that's where I believe in energy and healing, and, I'm spiritual. I believe in spirits, and I've seen it with my own eyes. So that's, nothing. When I share that with people, of course, some people are leery, but that's fine. It's not for them. I had a call one morning where this daughter was going to go meet her mom, pick her up to go get breakfast. Mom wouldn't open the door, and she heard her alarm going off in her bedroom. So, obviously had to kick the door in and go in and check. And I, just as clear as I can see everything around me right now, I came in and literally, in a spiritual way of seeing things, but her spirit was just hovering over her body until I walked in the room, and then it left. And it was almost like waiting, to be found. I know people that work at, nursing homes, and they say when somebody passes, they always open up the window, just as like a way of letting that spirit leave. And, even something like that, which is super, I'd say taboo, but yeah, you talk about that and some people think they're crazy, or, if you don't see it, you don't see it. And that's fine. I see it. I see a lot of things like that. I was actually just I just met somebody the other day who does acupuncture and a lot of energy healing and things like that. And I told her the same, told her I need to make an appointment and do some of that stuff. And I was just kind of talking about some things, and a lot of cops, I think, have a specific call that they go to more than anything else, whether it's car accidents or, domestic violence calls or this, that. It just seems to be, after so many years, something about who you are, that's the calls you get. And mine were medical assists. And I did CPR 14 times, which is kind of a lot for a cop, who's, usually a cop, you show up, you kind of secure things, and the paramedics are there pretty soon, and they're the ones that do that. But for whatever reason, that was kind of my call. And so, having done that, watched a lot of people's soul literally leave their body. And I was telling her some of this stuff, and she told me, she said, well, it sounds like you, dang it, I can't remember the exact word, something like a gatekeeper, basically. Is what she said, there's something about you, your energy, your soul, whatever it be, that you're supposed to be there to help people cross over.
Yeah, I believe that. I had a firefighter and they used to call her the Grim Reaper. And she, and she, was like, had like, embarrassment about it. And I said, it seems like that's one of your roles here on earth is to help people cross over. And she goes, I never thought about it like that. And, but I mean, because she would be there on duty a lot of times, like that's not coincidental,
Right.
But it helped her kind of reframe it and look at it in a positive way
For
than
sure.
a negative,
Yeah. And even like sharing that, like I said, with my vision of having a Zoom thing and 200 cops from wherever, just sharing that story, maybe there's 20 cops in that Zoom meeting, seen the same thing, experienced the same thing. And what it does to me, it normalizes it, or it makes you not feel crazy, and like you said, reframing it, looking at it a different way.
Yeah, and then it makes it okay to talk about. The thing with the energy work is really important because everything you guys go through, you went through physically too. You go through physically. So it's like your body, until you get like worked on, this is what I believe, it stays holding on to that. It doesn't just like release it, because even if years have passed,
right,
it stays holding on, the people that you encountered and picking up their energy. And so a lot of times you can think it's your depression, and it's other people's too that you've picked up along the way.
For sure. I agree with that for sure. I mean, there's times now, the dreams I still have are pretty ridiculous. And it's like, I have a sense sometimes that I just have like certain spirits from people who passed away while I was working that are still kind of hanging around me. And, I'm not sure what to do with that. It's just become normal for me, but it is things, I carry it, and it's almost like, what is it that you need, and it's.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know this, but energy work can be done distantly because the energy is limitless. Like, we have a physical body that limits our energy, but I work on people all over the country. And so let me know if you want to do some of that work, because you don't necessarily have to be here physically.
Yeah.
But it's very powerful to just be able to release all of that, from a mental health standpoint, even it's helpful. So, yeah. Well, talk a little bit about your me versus me.
Yeah. So that name came to me probably a couple of years ago now. And really in August, when I kind of made a change overall and decided that really the mental change that happened for me in August last year was, I'm worth more than I'm giving myself. And again, that's still a process, I still struggle with things a lot, and let myself get down and this and that. But at the end of the day, as it comes to depression, things like that, I would never let any other person talk to me the way I talk to myself, and so that's part of it. Me versus me is I need to not listen to myself all the time, but talk to myself. And then go into, sometimes being alone, sometimes, when it's 3:30 in the morning and I'm suicidal, and, of course there's a ton of people say, hey, call anytime, but you're not going to make that call 90% of the time. It's, I need to get through it by myself. I have nobody else I can rely on except for me. And so again, it's having a strategy, having a plan. So when those things happen, how to get through it. Not to say community is not important, but it starts with you, and it starts in my head. And that's where me versus me comes in. It's my head against my head. Well, which voice is going to win? There's a story about, two wolves, and, the wolf that gets fed is going to obviously get bigger and stronger and, eventually take out the other wolf that doesn't get fed. So, I tell people a lot, talk to yourself instead of listening to yourself. We have tons of thoughts that go through our head, and your brain can tell you some pretty horrific things, and I've heard it, but again, it's what do I give energy to? Am I going to listen to that and believe that, or am I going to remind myself of the good things and what I am doing and things like that? So, and just
Right. I'll tell people, well, would you tell your best friend those things? And they're like, no way. And I'm like, well, then why don't talk to yourself like that, you know?
right,
Talk to yourself the way you would talk to your best friend.
for sure. Yeah, and just me being, an athlete and super competitive and everything I do, that's where, me versus me came in is, I can either let the negative win out, or I can let the positive win out. And life's a whole lot better when the positive talk is talking and winning. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on the show. And I'd like to have you back in the future too. So like, if you think of something else you'd like to come and talk about, I will be putting together a series leading up to 9/11, because this is the 20th year anniversary. So maybe you can be part of that. I'm going to do like a whole month of different segments. So I'll be in touch about that. And yeah, thanks a lot. Hopefully I'll meet you in person someday.
yeah, for sure. We'll
Okay.
definitely make it happen. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.